Welcome to Bash the Stampede University for the RC enthusiast and the curious. Since this is the first video of the series, we are going to start from the very most basic of basics. We're going to talk about what is an RC car, and we're going to talk about the anatomy of an RC car, like what makes it work and how does it work. Okay, so RC stands for radio control. There are four major components that would control an electric RC car. You have the transmitter, which sends the signal. This can have any number of knobs and switches on it. This is essentially your human interface. When you steer the wheel, it steers. When you hit the throttle, it does the throttle. When you shift, it shifts. When you do this, it does that, right? You can have any number of channels, but most RC cars will have at least two. You need steering, which is typically channel 1, and you need throttle, which is typically channel 2. That will tell the receiver here, which can also have any number of channels, what to do with that corresponding channel. It has different inputs on it. Okay, so your input 1 is going to be connected most likely to a steering servo. So here you can see the connector. This is what plugs into that receiver, and then this is the steering servo. It's a box with a little knob lever kind of thing on it, and it turns like that. So your steering rods are connected here. If the transmitter tells the receiver to turn left, then the little motor in here is going to say, let's go left. And it'll do the same if you go right, and it can decide just how much you really want to go left or right. And that is the very basics of a servo. They come in many different ways. There's a lot to talk about there. Different video. The next thing in an electric RC car that we're going to be worried about is an ESC. So this right here is a Hobbywing 1060 ESC. It will also plug into the receiver. Here you can see the same sort of cable. It is going to plug in on the channel 2. It has a battery connector on it. So this is where the power for everything is received. This will also power your receiver. So when this is switched on, it sends power to this receiver. These little wires here connect to your motor, and this over here is just a little off and on switch. But yeah, the ESC does a lot. It gives you your throttle control, it gives you your brakes, it gives you your reverse, it gives you everything that you want as far as going forwards, stopping, or coming backwards. Okay, so how does it work on a nitro car? I'm glad you asked. Instead of an ESC on channel 2, you'll actually have a throttle servo, and what that'll do is that throttle servo will open or close the lever on the carburetor. And a lot of times when it closes that carburetor, it also does double duty, twisting and pulling some brake calipers together against a usually composite disc brake. And sometimes they have brake pads and sometimes they don't. But either way, something is composite and something is metal, and we have a brake disc. So when it goes the other way, closing the throttle and applying pressure to the brakes, the further you go, the more pressure you get, and it'll slow the model down. It's time for a little bit of an anatomy lesson, and we are going to use my Traxxas Stampede to sort of detail this. So coming over here, we can see loud and proud the ESC. You know it's the ESC because that's what the battery plugs into, and that's what the motor plugs into. The receiver is housed on the other side here. It's in a nice little box to keep it from getting wet and muddy. To continue this little anatomy lesson, we can see that there's a steering servo right here. You can see the servo horn right there, and you can see that it's connected to these tie rods, and yeah, we get steering action. We have a set of shocks up front, you know, tires. These are called A-arms, hinge pins up in there. We will go over this kind of stuff in more detail as we do some more technical stuff, breaking things down and putting them together. There is a slot for a battery. Many different types of batteries out there in the world, but today you are most likely to deal with a LiPo battery. Here around back, this is the motor. It is a brushless motor. There are brushless and brushed motors. That is a conversation for another video. We'll do an electric RC car deep dive. That's all the Stampede is. Nice, simple rig. And here is a nitro RC car. Very different car. This is a touring car, and it's old, and it doesn't work right now, but it will work just fine for display purposes. Sorry it's so dirty. If you look over here, you can see this is the carburetor on a nitro RC car, and back here they have a servo operating the throttle. And if you look down in here, you can actually see a disc brake. Okay, now this is a Nitro TC3. This is an old RC car, but it all works the same. So we can look down the carburetor here and you can see that it is basically closed right now, just a little bit open for idling. Now if we turn the servo, you can see that the carburetor starts to open. Right now it's basically full throttle. Now this other lever over here, this operates the brake. Okay, so when we go this way, we basically close our throttle, and this little lever at the bottom here, this is gonna apply the brake. It's gonna squeeze the brake pads into this brake disc. Like right now, I can't really move it, but if I open this guy up, it should move. That's basically throttle 101. The steering servo on this guy is hiding down here. And right over here is where a battery pack would go on a nitro car. You need a battery pack to power the receiver because there is no ESC. But other than that, the differences between the two aren't that great, at least when it comes to radio gear. All right, so I just showed you guys an electric monster truck and a nitro touring car. And honestly, aside from like how the radios work and where the channels are, the two couldn't really be any more different. But one thing they have in common is that they are both 10th scale. Now, 1/10 scale is a size. There's a lot of different sizes here. Basically, the higher the number, like 1/24th, is gonna be smaller than 1/10. And 1/8 will be one bit bigger than 1/10. It's like fractions, right? Now, one of the first ones I'm going to show you is a 28th scale. I think they're 28th or 27th. This is a Kyosho Mini Z four-wheel drive, 4x4, actually, I think is what it's called. As you can see, it is an insanely detailed, super little. But yeah, this little RC car is totally hobby grade, and it's just an electric RC car. But it just so happens to be quite small because it's 28th scale or 27th, whichever it is. So here's my Red Cat Ascent. This is 18th scale. It's a little bit bigger than the Jimny was. Here comes that Traxxas Stampede again. That is 10th scale versus 18th scale. Let me show you something else, 10th scale, that's a little more crawler oriented. Here's a 10th scale Bronco. There's a little bit of a size difference there. Now, I don't have anything 5th scale or 8th scale even to show you right now, but basically, they do get bigger. 5th scale is pretty darn huge, especially like the 5th scale monster trucks that they have out there. 10th scale is pretty much the standard if you ask me, and it's actually my favorite scale of RC car. The 10th scale is small enough to kind of play with wherever, and it is big enough to have all of the performance, power, and everything that you would want out of a hobby grade RC car. All right, so to go along with all of the different sizes of RC car that are available, there are also a lot of different types of RC car available. So we're gonna go ahead and we'll take a look at some of these things, and we'll start again with our little Mini Z. So our little Mini Z here is what is absolutely going for scale appearance here. They did not give it big old tires. The big old tires would definitely help with performance, but they did not put those on here because it wouldn't look right. This heavier plastic body here, it's gonna have like a model-like look. Honestly, the plastic is heavier than what we would have on this particular guy. This is a Lexan, which is a really thin polycarbonate material. It's light and it wouldn't impact performance as much, whereas like this really will. The point here is scale appearance. This guy's a little bit less for scale. This guy's a little bit more for like off-road, trail truck / rock crawling performance. A lot of people are gonna build something like this into a competition level rock crawler even. A lot of people get out there and they go to comps and they have a lot of fun with that. But yeah, so this is going to be a little bit higher performance and a little bit less scale. Now, if we can come back to the Traxxas Stampede here, this guy is what we would call a basher. A basher style RC car is literally for doing exactly that. You are going to go jump this thing. You're going to go do backflips with this thing. I mean, it's got a wheelie bar on it. It is absolutely not meant to look scale. It is high performance, but not in a racing kind of way or a crawling kind of way. It's high performance in a, I'm really fast and I will jump over the house and possibly survive that a few times kind of way. Here is our little Nitro TC3 again. I just threw the body on so you can kind of take a look at it. It's super dusty. I'm sorry, I should have cleaned it, but like we're just not here yet in the Bash the Stampede list of things to do. I'm going to use it as like a race car. Okay, this is more like a race car style performance that we're trying to get out of here. Now, one thing that you'll notice about an RC car that is geared a little bit more for like racing style performance is that it'll have a lot of adjustability on it. There will be a lot of different things that you can turn. You can adjust the toe, you can adjust the camber, the caster, stuff like that. Okay, so now that I've showed you some example RC vehicles, I do want to say that it's not set in stone necessarily what category an RC car falls into. Sometimes 10th scale looks a little bit more 8th scale, and sometimes you can race a basher, and sometimes you can bash a race truck, and sometimes you can bash a crawler even. Sometimes a smaller crawler will perform admirably, whereas a bigger crawler may not. There's just a whole lot of in between there, so take everything there with sort of a grain of salt. Now, I don't want to overwhelm anybody. I think that, you know, obviously you get into what you like, but just know that there is a lot to try out. So if you're ever getting burnt out on one thing, there's plenty of other stuff to check out. One of the things that makes a hobby grade RC car hobby grade is the fact that it is repairable, and for most of them, upgradable. That is probably the main difference outside of performance between a toy grade and a hobby grade RC car. Okay, so that is not the way that a shock should look. Okay, well, if you look, it appears that we can easily unscrew it, and actually we can take the whole shock apart and I can replace just the shaft, assuming nothing else is broken. This is the beauty of hobby grade RC cars. Not only can I replace that part, but I can replace all the parts on the entire truck. If I break something, most times I'm a few dollars away from having it running again. There's almost no parts on this TRX-4M that are stock. Look at that. Hobby grade RC. This is what it's all about. It's about having fun, it's about upgrading, it's about enjoying the performance, and keeping your model running, and also customizing that model to whatever you want it to be. As an overview, I think we have in detail talked about a lot of different types of RC car and truck, but they all have one thing in common. You're going to control it with some type of transmitter, you're going to turn, you're going to use throttle, sometimes you'll have more channels and you can shift or turn on headlights or something, but overall, the concept is the same. There are so many different types that it can definitely be a little bit overwhelming, which is why the next video in this series is going to be choosing your first RC car. And we're going to kind of go over the different types and sort of like what you should get. Class is dismissed. Thank you for coming to the very first lesson. If you like this video and you learned something, you should subscribe or like the video or both. Anyway, we'll see you in the next lesson.